Hey, you're on That's Helpful with me, Ed Stott, your weekly serving of self-improvement backed by science. Now, today, a topic that is going to hit home for you, I guarantee it. Back in 2015, journalist Gemma Hartley wrote an article for Harper's Bazaar that went viral. You probably read it. It was about emotional labour and it really hit home for so many people. In fact, 2 billion people ended up reading it. The article led to Gemma writing a book on the topic and coming up with some real solutions to this incredibly familiar experience that so many of us will have just given up on. Gemma is the author of Fed Up, Navigating and Redefining Emotional Labour for Good. Gemma, tell me about the Mother's Day that led to you writing that viral article for Harper's Bazaar.
Oh, yes, that Mother's Day. It was a long time ago. My kids were really young. I've got, kids that are older now, but they were really little. They were, I think, 2, 4, and 6 at the time. And for Mother's Day, the only thing that I wanted was for my husband to have a cleaning service come in and do the bathrooms for us. And part of the reason I wanted this gift was that I wanted him to see all of the steps that went behind that. You have to make sure that you have a reputable service. You need to make an appointment at a time that works for everyone's schedule. All of these little details that go into it, not just it's not just a click and buy sort of thing. And that was the gift to me. And he decided instead to clean the bathrooms on Mother's Day himself. Which left me with the kids doing all of the normal mental load and emotional labor work that I always do and doing it on my own because he was busy cleaning the bathrooms. And he had also, gotten a gift for me and for his mother. And he had left this big box of gift wrap in our closet. So it's right in the way. You can't get around it. You can't get to clothes. It's really heavy and it goes really high up. I'm very short. I can't really reach it without a good amount of effort. And I kept thinking, there's no way that he's waiting for me to tell him to put this thing away that he got out himself. There's just no way. And on Mother's Day, when it was still there, it had been there about a week, I got really fed up and I grabbed a kitchen chair, drug it all the way through the house, made a big, loud to-do about putting it up in the closet. And he comes in there and he says, if you wanted me to put that away, all you had to do is ask. And it was like a lightning bolt moment for me. I'm like, that's the thing. I don't want to have to ask. I want a partner who is on equal footing with me, who knows what to do and when, and have a co-created life, basically. I don't want another, child to take care of or an adult that feels like an employee, like this whole manager, CEO, COO situation that people have going on. It doesn't work. I think that relationships should be on as equal footing as they can be. And that dynamic was really hurting our relationship and bringing a lot of resentment into our marriage.
And that story will be so damn familiar to so many people listening. When you hear that, you're like, yep, I've been there. Absolutely. I would be surprised if there was someone listening who thought, nah, never heard of it. But when you talk about emotional labor, it is so incredibly pervasive, like for women in particular. And I know you've looked at same-sex couples as well. And some of these dynamics play out, which we can talk about later. But it is everywhere. When you're talking about emotional labor, you've gone into it in a little bit of detail there. But when you start to think about it, there is so much, isn't there, that we do take on and that then is emotional labor.
So I define emotional labor in 4 different parts, really. It's the noticing work, which is noticing what needs to be done, knowing what needs to be done, and then creating a plan for how that work is going to get done. Then you're either doing it yourself or you're delegating out that work. And this is, I think, the part where a lot of resentment comes in, is that if you have to delegate out the work. That's a task. That's a mental task that you have to delegate the work. And then it doesn't leave your plate because you still feel responsible to make sure that that work gets done, because a lot of the time it doesn't. That's such a familiar dynamic that you ask for something to be done. Maybe you have a timeline in your head about it and your partner just has no hurry about it. No sense of urgency, doesn't see why it's such a big deal. One that I hear a lot is the dishes at night. Like if there are dishes in the sink at night, why is it a big deal to leave them until morning? Well, if you're the one getting up in the morning, getting kids out the door, it's a really big deal to wake up to a really messy kitchen and have to start that cleaning process before you get into all of the other processes that need to happen in order for everyone to get out the door in the morning. And so I think that's where a lot of it comes in, is that overseeing work is really mentally taxing for people and having to constantly delegate. I describe it to people a lot like, one of the things that constantly gets brought back to me is like, well, why is it such a big deal to ask? How hard can it be to ask? And I say, well, imagine, this is usually in heterosexual couples. Imagine a man comes home and has to ask his wife to do anything. She will sit on the couch until told that it's time to put dinner on. It's time to get the kids in the bath. It's almost bedtime. Could you help me with bedtime? All of these little things. If someone is just sitting there waiting to be directed, that's not a partnership.
And it's so true, isn't it? Because you've even talked about the fact that, you would be going out on stage, or you would be in the middle of a meeting and you would get a text saying, hey, where's this stuffed animal? Or, hey, what time does so-and-so get picked up from preschool, right?
Yeah. And it's so pervasive even that when I went to Australia and was speaking at the Sydney Opera House, I had really specifically told the nanny, I'm going to be overseas. I'm going to be on a totally different time schedule. My husband will be here. He will be working from the office, but any questions you have, direct them to him. And I still got a text from the nanny that was with our children saying, is it okay if they watch this TV show? And of course it came through at 2 a.m. because of the time change. And I was just blown away that, even with the most explicit instructions, people still assume that I'm the default parent. And it happens at school. It happens with sports. It happens with all of these things that my husband and I are really trying to equal out between us. And we still get that pushback of society thinking no, it's your job.
Absolutely. And you also talk about the other ways in which we reinforce these gender roles every day. And one of them is the way in which your husband will either, or, men in general will either be congratulated for work that women do with no congratulations, or expect congratulations for work that we do all the time.
Oh, yes. I think it's really pervasive. It used to happen in my relationship. It doesn't happen anymore. But if my husband would clean the kitchen, it was a big to do. We would, we'd have to go and look at the kitchen and say, congratulations, it's so clean. It was kind of silly, but he really wanted praise because it felt like he was going above and beyond and doing my job for me. I think there was that expectation that all of the domestic labor that happened within our house was my responsibility. And that is really what a lot of it comes down to, that wanting to be praised for extra credit work. It's because they think I'm helping you. And help really implies that it's your job and I'm going above and beyond by doing it for you. And I really want to shift that narrative and start to say, no, it's everyone's job in the household to take care of the household. But it also happens out in the world too. If my husband takes all 3 of our kids out, oh my gosh, people have to stop him in the grocery store and tell him what an amazing dad he is just for being out and parenting. And no one's coming up to me in the store and being like, you're doing such good work. You're such a good mom. just for existing in the world with your children. And it makes him really angry too, because he's like, no, like I am a really good, attentive parent. It's not about me just being out in the world with them. It's all of this other work that I'm doing, trying to be emotionally connected with them, trying to, really come together with me and make sure that we're on the same page about parenting. He is a really good dad, but when he's seen parenting at all, that is like above the bar.
Man, it's wild, isn't it? And when you were writing the book, your husband actually was laid off. And so he found himself at home the majority of the time. How did that change your relationship?
I'm really, really glad that happened. Mostly because I don't think I could have met my deadline without having a full-time at-home parent. And I think it was also really good because it allowed us to be in a sort of pressure cooker situation where I was suddenly the expert on emotional labor and the mental load. And I had to figure out so much so fast. And I hadn't figured this out in my own relationship. I had wrote an article about how things weren't working. And so I was like, oh, now we have to actually figure it out together. And having him at home, having him able to see everything that goes into being a parent that is at home full time, even if you're working or looking for work, there's still so much that goes into keeping a household running, especially when you have 3 young kids. And it really forced us to look at what wasn't working and figure it out together, which was such a shift for me because I always felt the full responsibility for it, where if I wanted to change the mental load or emotional labor, it was sort of my job to do it. To come up with a better system, to figure out how to make him understand. And it really dawned on me that no, this is like a co-creating situation where we both have to be present. We both have to be fully invested in this work, and we need to do it together if it's going to last.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is such a tricky thing to broach. And I guess the reaction from so many people would be, well, you should just stop being a control freak and you need to lower your standards and let your partner deal with things in their own time. You have touched on this a little bit, but what do you say to that? Because I know I am an incredibly house proud person. I like things done. I like the house clean. I can't just let things go. What's your response to that?
Well, there are, first of all, cultural reasons why women are the ones that have that like pride in the home. That is really culturally ingrained, that it is our responsibility to make a house a home. And so things being neat and tidy are actually really deeply tied to our cultural worth. And so that's why mess doesn't bother men as much as it bothers women, because there is this deeply culturally ingrained message that your value is tied to how cleanly your home is, how well behaved your kids are. All of these sort of arbitrary markers of, what makes you a good wife or a good mother are very external. And so I want to say, first of all, like there's a reason those expectations are different in the first place. And I really tend to think it's not a matter of being a control freak. It's being the one who's been in charge and has figured out what works best. I think that so many women, like no one that I talked to over the course of researching this book, and I found this true in my own relationship as well, no one is making standards arbitrarily. They have done a lot of trial and error work to figure out what is working for their family in order to get done everything that needs to get done. And when we do go a little bit above and beyond, it's usually because we're promised that doing that extra step, getting that extra system in place, it's going to give us more time and mental space, which is what the mental load and emotional labor steal from us. And so that's sort of the reasoning behind why we do what we do. It's not because we're control freaks. It's because we are trying to carve out some space for ourselves and get a tremendous amount of work done. Domestic labor and emotional labor is such a all-encompassing job. And I really advocate for having shared standards. And what that means is you stop being in control and you invite someone else to look at those standards with you. And it can get a little bit annoying because sometimes it's like, well, I don't see why something should be done that way. If you've got a reason, and chances are for most things you do have a reason, then you're going to let your partner know, like, this is the reason for it. We do this because it, produces this result. Now, it should become pretty clear pretty quickly that most of the things you're doing for a reason. The things that are more in the realm of like, I just like things done that way, that's fine. You can still have things done that way. You can still set that as your shared standard as long as you and your partner agree on it. But I really think it comes down to coming together, being really explicit about your expectations, because that is so much of it. At least in my relationship, it was. I had these expectations of what I wanted our house to look like, what my cleanliness standards were, how I liked things done. And so much of the time, I would just not say anything about them, but be really, really resentful when it wasn't done to that standard. So that was like just communicating about what my standards and expectations were. It was a huge undertaking. It took like months and months and months of us talking about it every single day. And I sort of just put it out there, like it was while I was writing the book. And I was like, hey, there are a lot of things that I like done a certain way that I have just sort of assumed would always be my job to do. And they kept building and building and building and building. And now I'm going to let you in on all of them. So if it seems like I am nitpicking all the time, I'm not. I'm just letting you into my world to see how I think about things. And that's what it really comes down to, is like inviting your partner into your lived experience, into your perception, so that you're on the same page and working from a similar place.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly helpful. And, you talk about in the book that men will often do emotional labor as a means to an end, whereas women do it as just a way of being. And I think that illustrates that point. But what do you mean by that?
So that section of the book, I'm talking more about emotional labor in a broad sense, the emotional labor that we do outside of the emotional labor that helps get like the mental load taken care of and domestic labor done. We also perform emotional labor, which I should have said earlier on, I like broadly define as the work that we do to keep those around us comfortable and happy, and sort of keeping the peace is basically what the heart of emotional labor is. And when we do that in the world, we do that, in workplaces, we do it in interactions with other people, whether we're in a social gathering or just on the street. And we have to constantly be on as women. It's almost a defense mechanism. I really love Rose Hackman, whose book Emotional Labor came out last year. She talks about how this is like a survivor's instinct or a victim's instinct, like that intuition that you have that says like, oh, I better smile in this situation, or, oh, I better, make myself a little bit smaller. It's not like an intuitive thing that women have just because. It's something that we have in order to keep us safe. One thing I think about often is like street harassment. How often do you, keep your eyes down? Or if you're being catcalled, like, do you smile politely and keep walking? There are so many calculations that you're doing in like, okay, what keeps the peace? What keeps this person happy and content with my existence in the world so that this doesn't escalate into violence? When we talk about emotional labor for men, It's often in the context of the dating period. I talk a lot about like the expectations in romantic films where it's this big grand gesture of emotional labor of like noticing what someone likes, making the effort and doing this big thing that shows your love. And then you can be done. Yeah. You can wash your hands of it. You don't have to do it. It's these kind of big grand moments rather than that daily constant. What do we need to do in order to keep things running smoothly, in order to keep everyone happy and content?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think it's something that so many of us have just accepted as the way it is. And, we try to change things or, try to bring it up, but kind of not gotten anywhere. So it's just like, well, okay, I guess that's just the way it is. But when you start to think about it, it's just so pervasive. It's no wonder people feel so downtrodden and irritated by this. So you kind of touched on the solutions and some of the things that you found really work in writing the book and doing your research. What are some of the other things that we might be able to bring into our relationship if we really want to tackle this once and for all, and also tackle this so that our kids and the next generation don't take on these terrible gender roles?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about in terms of not perpetuating these gender roles, obviously what is modeled is going to be so, so important. But I am really like in the thick of it with my kids. I've got a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 13-year-old right now. Yeah, so they're, wow. Kind of in the middle of adolescence right now. And one of the big things that I've changed, since they were toddlers is that I don't ask anyone in my house for help anymore. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but help really implies that something is your job and that anyone that comes in and does that job is helping you, is doing extra credit work, but the responsibility remains yours. And so in keeping a household and keeping this domestic labor going, my kids are kids. They need reminders, but they don't need me to ask them to please help mom do this. Can you do this for mom? Instead, it's just like, hey, this needs to get done right now. And I still thank them for it. It's, not a big deal to just take that little thing off the end instead of saying, oh, can you please clean up your room for mom? Can you please clean up your room before we leave? It's a really small shift of language, but it really starts to reinforce that domestic labor is everyone's responsibility. And I'm really, really keen to make sure that my expectations stay really even keeled between my boys and my daughter. I know how easy it is to fall into this, expectation trap. Of thinking that my daughter already is much better at these things than her brothers. It is not because she is naturally better at keeping her room clean, but I am positive that she goes over to friends' houses and girls that she know have different expectations than their brothers do. I'm sure she's seen it modeled. Even if it's not in our house, it's out there in the world. She knows that these are expectations, because she's coming into middle school. She's coming into that age where she's very aware of cultural expectations. And I've noticed the way that her behavior is starting to change. And so keeping those expectations really, really clear that like, if your sister can do all of this, trust me, both of you can do it as well. Is so important to not write this off as like she's just naturally a little bit more organized. She's naturally more clean. So I'm going to have her stay at that standard and let her brother's standards slip a little bit.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, I can hear a little cat there. It's so cute. I love it.
3 cats in this room with me right now, and I'm just like, no, don't do it.
Oh my God, 3 cats, and you're an expert on emotional labor. I think I love you. Lucky my dog isn't here causing trouble.
Yeah, I've got 2 dogs out in another room. I've made many mistakes in my life.
No, they do not sound like mistakes. They sound like some of the best decisions you've ever made. More pets, I say. Right. So that's a brilliant piece of advice there, and incredibly helpful way of shifting the way we think about these things. But I think for so many people, they would say, but if I bring it up, it always just becomes like an argument, and my partner feels like I'm attacking them. And I haven't, it's annoying because then again, that's a more emotional labor in fixing the emotional labor issue. But have you found a way around that? So have you found a good way of broaching it that genuinely does move things forwards and help relationships?
What I'll say to that is often the reason that it's turning into a fight is that a lot of people come to their partner when they're fed up, when they are feeling resentment in the moment. And that makes it really difficult to have a constructive conversation about how things might change. What I really love is advocating for first just having a conversation about where you're at. You're really just asking your partner to listen to your lived experience, to what it feels like to do this work. And I set that up saying, I am not saying that you're doing anything wrong. You're doing that emotional labor of sort of like making them comfortable because you know that this is kind of a fraught subject. If you know that already, like, yes, the emotional labor is a little bit unavoidable, but saying, this is really about how I'm experiencing life, how I'm getting overwhelmed. And I really want us to do this work together. And just setting up that conversation with a sense of, wanting to be heard and hoping that your partner meets you with curiosity. So often these things devolve into fights because you're already in that place of resentment. But if you can pull away from that and say like, no, this is a person that I chose to partner with and that I believe can partner with me in a way that is so much more effective. I think that is where the conversation needs to start. I think that's where the root of it needs to be. This sense of curiosity of what can we do different? And I think it really helps to keep in mind how deep that social conditioning goes. I'm talking about my daughter who's 11, who is already picking up so much of this cultural messaging, even when she's not seeing it in the home at all. I really do think that me and my husband have a really, really equal relationship now. It's been years since I wrote that article, years since the book released, and we have changed so much that our relationship, the way that it was before, I am sure she can't remember it because she was so little. And so, thinking back and realizing that you were picking this up from probably the time you could start to perceive gender roles, which is, I think, around 4 years old.
Yeah.
It's a long time that you have been going in these separate directions. And to come together now intentionally is going to take work. It's going to be messy. And as long as you're both committed to doing that together, it's doable. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of grace, really, for both of you to get through to the other side. I sometimes say that it's like learning another language. Imagine that ever since you were 4, everyone around you spoke French. And so you grew up and you're fluent in French. And then you ask your partner, who has heard French, it's been around, but never taught to them. Never were they told to listen to that, to learn that. It's sort of been in the background. Learning a second language is difficult. It's not impossible, but it's going to be a little bit broken in the beginning. It's going to feel really difficult. You're not going to be able to get your mouth to make the right shape, the first few times, but you'll get there eventually if you're committed to it enough. And, it's not a perfect analogy, but it sort of shows like, oh, I've been steeped in this my whole life. So of course things seem really, really easy for me. If you have a partner that has never had those expectations put on them, it's going to be a shift. but it's a shift that they should make because you are choosing to do life together. You are choosing to be in a full equal partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've said that, now you feel that your husband's life and he feels that his life is richer for it, right?
Absolutely. I think emotional labor really brings you in tune with the workings of your daily life. And a lot of emotional labor is relational work, right? You're noticing what makes other people happy. You're planning the get-togethers. You're making sure that you call your mom on their birthday. You're doing all of this really intentional work to create relationships that are lasting and fulfilling. And a lot of the times, men will just completely let their wives take over that work. So, there was a time where I was the one that was saying, your mom's birthday is coming up. Like, what do you think she would like? I was the one buying Christmas presents for everyone. He wasn't very good at getting together with friends unless it was my friend group and all the husbands sort of get together. He had to get a lot more intentional about his relationships when I stopped doing all of that work for him. And it made his life much richer. I think it's the same with our kids, where when you're closely attuned to your children's lives, their emotional needs, which one is their favorite cup, what kind of foods they like, you're showing them that you're interested and care about their lives. Some of it is just tantrum prevention, but it's also being there for them in a way that is really significant. And I think he is such a better parent for doing the emotional labor of really taking part in our home, really taking an active role in his relationship with his family and his friends. And it really does, take him away from where he was before, which was also a really narrowly defined role that said that his worth came from how much money he brought home, and that's about it. So many men are tied to this narrative that like success and money are really all you're bringing to the table, maybe mowing the lawn or doing the barbecue, those once in a while tasks. That's how you contribute to the domestic labor. But being really attuned to what happens every day, being a part of that, it really makes life richer because you're there for it. You're present.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't thought about that before, but if you're not investing in the relationships around you in that way, people don't invest in you in the same way. And so you really miss out on stuff. I think that's such a great perspective shift and something that so many men would really give a shit about. Like they would be incredibly bothered if they didn't have that richness of relationships and closeness to their friends and their kids and their wives. Like, I think that would really bother them. But as you say, we just don't talk about or think about that perspective. Is there anything else that you've found that really has been an absolute game changer for you and for the people that you've spoken to for the book in this regard?
I think some of the things that make the biggest difference are those shared, like creating the shared standards is huge. When everyone is on the same page about what needs to happen and how things should look, how things should be done. It takes a long time to get through all of the different things that happen. But having that clarity really, really helps. Having the expectation that it's going to be more than a single conversation. There are so many conversations, some of them very small, some of them more drawn out. We spend a lot of car trips talking about, things that are working, things that aren't working. So being in a state of constant communication that doesn't feel like a fight, something that feels like it's productive and curious and hopeful. For the future, I think is really, really important because we still talk about, emotional labor, or if there's something that needs to be recalibrated because seasons change, the kids are getting older, new sports happen, all of these shifts that happen in the emotional labor and mental load that need to be dealt with, we have to keep talking about them. And so having that, initial conversation, it's not the end of it. expect constant conversations, I'd say for about a year. Like, I think it was really a full year of like really constantly, like it was central to our lives. And it was easy for me in a way because I had a book to write. And so it was very front and center for us. And I think having it front and center allowed us to get through it a little bit quicker. But I think for most people, it's really, really constantly talking about this for a long time. And then maybe, things start to settle. It starts to feel like you're on equal footing. And so those conversations become less frequent. But I'd say at least once a week or every other week, we're still talking about it. What's working? What's not? What needs to get done this week? We're really in the planning process, the noticing process together now.
But I guess one of the things that, really would irk me about this or, gets people wound up and kind of makes people think that it's futile is the fact that, we're still managing this ourselves and we're still the ones who are having to do the work to get men to step up. Do you think in coming forwards or like making a difference in this area of our lives, we kind of have to accept that there is a little bit of work that we do have to take on to make this change? I guess it's just like it's an uneasy partnership, right? In the fact that we're talking about dealing with emotional labor, but it's all the things that we have to do to make this change. And I'm sure this is something that you've thought about and come across a lot.
Yeah. And I think it is this delicate balance of, you're in this partnership. So naturally, like I would hope that you would want to help your partner in some ways, come into that understanding of what's happening here. That doesn't mean that you're supposed to carry and baby them along every single step. I think there is a really big adjustment period and there is labor that goes into that. But your partner should be showing up with an equal amount of curiosity and labor. And what that can look like is something like reading the books on emotional labor. If they are willing to do this work with you, they should be willing to, pick up a book or listen to a podcast on it, read some articles. My husband still struggles with this because he feels a little bad that I'm the one that is like constantly referring him. Like at some point, I hope he will like have the wherewithal to like find his own path towards finding new creators that are talking about this, knowing which books he should read. But because I'm really steeped in that world, I don't mind handing off that information to him and say, as long as he is receiving that and saying, yes, I'm going to listen to that. Yes, I am going to read that. Really allowing them to immerse themselves in it so that you're not their teacher. You're not supposed to be the hand holder. There are so many people, not just myself, but like tons and tons of creators. Have them follow some Instagram accounts that talk about this all the time. Have them listen to podcasts like this one that are talking about emotional labor in ways that you might not want to re-articulate for them. They should be willing to do that work. And really, they should be willing to seek it out themselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes when it's framed by somebody who's not in the relationship and, it's something that really hits home, it's like, this isn't personal. This is a societal problem that we need to overcome together. And I think that perspective shift and getting some of that content from outside of your relationship can really be a game changer. It can be a massive help.
Yeah. And, it's not just women that are talking about this, which makes me so hopeful. There are men that are out there talking about this, educating on this. And sometimes that's much better received because it's coming from a perspective that is similar to your own. And so seek out the male creators that are talking about the mental load, that are talking about emotional labor, and let them help guide you forward.
Absolutely. This is so incredibly helpful, Gemma. I'm not surprised that you wrote the article in 2015 and almost 10 years later, you're still talking about it. Well, what's the one thing you want people to keep in mind if they only take one thing from our conversation?
I think the thing that I want people to keep in mind is that it's not a single conversation to fix everything, to fix a lifetime of conditioning. I think that keeping in mind that it's going to be a constant conversation and one that both partners should show up for fully is something that I really, really want people to keep in mind. And I also think that if those conversations are not going well, if you are consistently met with resistance, I think that first of all, one thing I always say that I regret not going a little bit harder on in the book is saying that it's okay to leave a situation where someone is not going to meet you where you are. If someone is unwilling to see your lived experience, then you can remove yourself from that relationship. That's not always possible. And if it's not, finding support outside of your relationship, getting really comfortable, asking for help from others, really reevaluating your standards. There are so many women I know that are in this situation where they really can't leave. Financially, it's untenable. There's a myriad of reasons why women can't leave bad relationships. And I think finding ways to look for support outside of putting it all on yourself all the time is really, really important to do.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Thank you so much for joining me today, Gemma. I really appreciate it. This has been incredibly helpful. And I know other people are really going to enjoy this conversation too. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Gemma is an author and her book is Fed Up, Navigating and Redefining Emotional Labor for Good. There is so much more in the book and so much helpful stuff that's genuinely going to make a difference to this. I know if you're anything like me, this will be something that you tried to tackle, you get fed up with it, you wane between thinking that you should lower your standards and you're not going to do that, But this book, it really is a game changer. So check it out. I'll pop a link in the show notes for you. You're really going to find it incredibly helpful. And I'll put links to where you can find Gemma online and on social media too. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you are enjoying the podcast so far, please leave me a review wherever you're listening. I really appreciate it. And if you're just joining us for the first time, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Ed Stott. I sincerely hope that's helpful.